Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Instant Speed Podcast. In response version, I've got the new number one player in the world. That would be Michael Hamilton, the winner of the most recent calling that went down in Indianapolis. You may have heard about it. And but not only that, this is the second calling win for Michael Hamilton, who also won back in Orlando. Now, the Orlando calling may have been a little overshadowed by the U.S. Nationals, but I promise you that it was a strong field out there as well. And we've got him. So, Michael, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So now here's the deal. The deal, frankly, is the fact that, I mean, I know that right after that big win, it was a grueling 2 days. You got to speak to Brian Gottlieb, and he asked you that infamous question, which I can do nothing but shower immense amounts of respect onto you, which was, who is the best flesh and blood player in the world? And I have massive respect and admiration for that answer. So for those who didn't hear it, please give us the answer that you gave on the broadcast.
Oh gosh, I have to repeat it. Well, I said someone has 2 calling wins.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I mean, it's just basically, your answer was essentially, please review the data. And that was it. So there was some recency to it, and it is absolutely accurate. So congratulations again on that win. And I want to dig into a little bit about the journey towards getting there. And before you even showed up to the calling in Indianapolis, arriving at Starvo, why was Bravo star of the show, the deck that you decided to go? Now, obviously, a lot of people are going to be out there saying, well, obviously you're going to take Starvo because it's just head and shoulders over every other hero, it seems. But for yourself, were there any other considerations of heroes that you were thinking about using?
Yeah, so even like the day before the event, I wasn't 100% I was going to play Starvo. I was like 85%-ish. And part of me still just wanted to play Oldheim because after Orlando, it's hard not to have a soft spot for Oldheim. You just play a character that no one thinks is particularly great and win a huge tournament with him. There's definitely some attachment there,
Oh, definitely. And especially since you've got results with that hero as well. Oldham in general is one of those heroes that seems pretty straightforward in terms of how you want to win. However, it does take a lot of reps. I feel it does take a lot of intricate understanding of just how to pick your shots with that hero. It's a hero of patience. It's a hero of practice and repetition, I feel. But ultimately, what led you to just land on Starvo? What sort of pulled you off? I mean, you're still within that Guardian field, but was there even another non-Guardian hero perhaps that was kind of tickling your fancy? Something within that triangle of doom, the Viscerite, Prism, Starvo, that kind of Bermuda triangle of nastiness?
Yeah, there was a small part of me that also wanted to play Prism. I had played a lot of Prism in some testing against my friends and teammates as basically playing the villain because none of us were really Prism players. So I had played Prism against them and it was pretty comfortable playing Prism, but I had never played any mirrors, and I think the Prism mirror seems like it'd be very, very skill intensive, and also you kind of need to know everything going on. So with 0 Prism mirrors under my belt, I wasn't comfortable registering Prism for the tournament.
Prism mirrors are definitely a unique animal. I've played a lot of those against Dale and Mac, and there's a lot of passing priority with an action point. So there's a lot of that going on to kind of freeze up your opponent. Now, ultimately, going into this game in Indy, you've basically decided on Starvo at a certain point. Like even the night before, you mentioned that it really went down to the wire. But preparing for this tournament, how many games a day would you say that you played? Now, this could be on any particular hero, but just in general, the process of, all right, you're hitting the books, as it were. You're doing your homework. You're getting into the lab and doing the repetitions. How many games a day were you jamming out in order to feel comfortable and prepared for Indianapolis?
It's hard to give an exact count of games per day because sometimes you're playing like a very slow game where I'm playing this control Starvo versus another slower Starvo deck. And those games, when you're playing untimed and just trying to figure out the optimal sequences every turn, those games can go really long, reasonably over an hour. I would say that I played at least 3 hours a day for the whole like week leading up to it, but I wouldn't know the exact game count.
That's fascinating. This is a question, again, always inspired by Dalen Mack, one of the hardest working people in the business. It's incredible how many games he usually jams out. He says that on his own, in his own ideal scenario, he's playing between 15 and 20 games a day, he says. And that to me seems incredible. So he's always asking me to poke and prod the champs to ask them just basically what their work ethic is. And I think he's going to constantly be surprised to note that it is nowhere near the sheer intensity that he puts in. He is an amazing player in his own right, but you yourself have done incredible things in the Flesh and Blood scene, and your version of Starvo in general has been a little bit unorthodox to a degree. I mean, I looked at dozens of Starvo lists at that tournament. Being on the broadcast team, I was privy to basically all the deck lists that I needed, and yours had some very unique choices, to say the least. Cards like Glacial Footsteps, cards like Disable. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you fell upon those cards as selections? As you know, these are cards that perhaps weren't even on the radar of other good players who were looking to play Starvo.
Yeah, so I think these cards, specifically the big Guardian blue attacks, fill a lot of roles. As a Guardian player, as an Oldheim player, I like blocking a lot. And I think these cards are like the best blocking cards outside of defense reactions in the game. They block for 3, which is a big part of it. And then also against Prism, having that high 7 and 8 power attack value is very good for blocking those Heralds.
Well, that's definitely part of it. I mean, while we were discussing it, we were just thinking that, you know what, I think that the fact that Brian and I were discussing your sort of strategy, your mantra into these matchups, and what we kind of surmised was a lot of these cards were, like you said, they were these utility cards that when the opportunity arose, you can always play them for big hits and big swings if your opponent kind of stumbles around, but ultimately they block 3 and they pop Heralds. And as a Starvo player, Prism was out there kind of lurking as the boogeyman in terms of keeping the Starvo players in check. And your strengths versus Prism seem to be not only the cards, but also patience and just a methodical approach to those lists. Can you talk a little bit about what those strengths were and how you came to your game plan facing off against what was a gauntlet, perhaps, of Prisms that were lurking in the field?
Yeah, so a lot of the Starvo lists, they're trying to use the hero power, attack Prism for a bunch of damage, and then use the hammer to clean up an aura afterwards. And that's great when you activate your hero power, but that doesn't happen every turn. So the turns that I don't activate my hero power, it's really important to have some options to at least try to clear 2 auras, because otherwise those turns are just going to be not very impactful at all. So I played 3 copies of Blink, 3 copies of Lead the Charge, and a time skippers as ways to give me, or let my heavy blue hands that aren't activating Starvo, it let them kill 2 auras so I wouldn't fall too far behind on board.
Another big question and point of debate that a lot of the top tier end of the player base discusses oftentimes is Ram's Head versus Stalagmite. And I find myself kind of bouncing back and forth in terms of what I feel. You were very adamant about jamming that Stalagmite in many matches. And given the fact that you're now the world #1, you're a 2-time calling, and you've won the most recent calling in Indianapolis, can you give us your thought process as to Stalagmite versus Ram's Head?
Yeah, well, I'm going to start this with something controversial, but I don't think it's even worth registering Ram's Head in your deck right now.
Whoa, see, now that's why we show up, baby. That's why we listen to the podcast. Hell yeah.
I think the only matchup that I would want Ram's Head over Stalagmite right now is Dash. But basically, Stalagmite, it blocks for 3 without costing any resource, or blocks for 2 and then 1 without costing any resources. And that Frostbite, if timed at the right time, can save you a lot of life. Against Runeblades, a lot of the time, it can save you a full Rosetta Thorn swing, which is about 4 life. And then, as you saw against Prism in my finals match, it can save you a lot of life when they're about to attack with all their shields and they don't have any floating resources. The Stalagmite just comes in and either costs them a whole card to keep attacking or shuts down their turn.
All right, you hear that, everyone from Harry Tarantula? That is exactly the point I was trying to make. We were having a lot of discussion about this, and that was exactly what I was explaining to people at particular ProQuest when they saw me jam Stalagmite and asking me why. And what I would say, it's not just the 2 it's blocking, it's the follow-up that it's disrupting as well. That is life gained and saved at the same time. And I'm glad to hear that I'm at least on somewhat of a championship wavelength. So that is good for me in my confidence level. But your confidence level going through day 1 and day 2, it seemed to increase, and you went in there with a lot of practice, but there must have been one matchup or a couple matchups perhaps that kind of resonate in your mind as being the toughest match that you played that weekend. Can you discuss, outside of the top 8, what perhaps in the Swiss rounds was your hardest matchup that you played?
It'd have to be my other match against Fino in round 7, I think. The game wasn't particularly close. I just fell behind early, couldn't keep up with the auras, and I missed one big stalagmite turn that I should have blocked with it that would have gained me 5 life and kept him from playing a blue aura that turn. And that was my first loss in the tournament, and it made me feel really rough going into the night on my first loss of the tournament, because it was the last round of day 1, ended up 6-1 on the day, and had just been completely trounced.
Now, that confidence that you say, like, it was your last match of the day. You were flying high at 6-0. You go 6-1, and then like you mentioned, you get absolutely dummied by a very, very good Prism player and a very good Prism deck. Going back to the hotel or going back to wherever you were staying and whatnot, how do you overcome that kick in the pants in terms of, that gut punch, as it were, where you were flying high and all of a sudden you just get absolutely grounded, and that realization sets in that maybe you don't have it that weekend? How did you approach that loss and then come back in day 2 and perform the way you did?
Well, there's actually several things I thought about. First, my draw wasn't particularly great in that game. I had one hand that had multiple red earth cards and no other elements, and I couldn't even set that up to pitch stack to a good hand for the following cycle because it was all earth cards. So knowing that was pretty unlucky helped. I also went back and watched the video, saw my mistake with the stalagmite, realized if I didn't make that mistake, the game would have been, I probably wouldn't have won that game because it was not at all close, but it would have been a very different end state where I would have had at least one more turn, probably several more turns to pull back into the game. So that helps too. And then the third thing is, Fino he played amazing that game. He's a great player, and I don't think every Prism I'm going to play against in the tournament is going to play as well as him. And that's shown by the fact that he did so well in the tournament in the end.
At the end of the day, you got to realize it's like, you know what? I got beat by somebody great. And that's that. There's no shame in that, right? It's just something that you got to put in your back pocket and realize that maybe next time you get him, you take something away from it. Like, you learn from that loss, and you move in with that kind of new knowledge and you build on that. And you did so, and the next day you performed well all the way up to the finals. And I want to know what your strategy was going into the match. You said that you already lost to Fino in the Swiss rounds of day 1 in round 7, and now you're going into the finals, and boom, you're faced off against essentially the guy who put you in your place to a degree. He humbled you in that day 1 with that Prism play. Was there a different strategy that you were employed? Was it stick to the game plan as you had it drawn out from the get-go?
Yeah, it was a very similar strategy. I changed my sideboard a little bit. In the round he beat me, I think he attacked me with Heralds basically 0 times. So I ended up cutting my Crippling Crushes for more blues and ended up playing the Winner's Bites instead of the Crippling Crushes, which I had cut in the Swiss round. As just, you need blue heavy hands to pop auras, and then just one more elemental for my Starvo triggers to make that a little more consistent. I think that change ended up helping a lot. The Winner's Bites were great. They helped trigger Starvo, and Crippling Crush would have not been particularly good in those matches, or in that match.
The patience and poise that you demonstrated in those games, I had the privilege of being able to cast that finals match with Brian Gottlieb, and what I kept going back to was the fact that what I mentioned was you must have the most clean house or apartment or wherever you live. It must be the most spotless place ever, because you were not satisfied until that board state was completely bare of any auras or any garbage. I don't want anything on the board at any time. And you were really methodical in terms of how you approached it. It was, face is not the place until everything was spick and span on the actual board. And for yourself to do that, was there any times during that game where you're like, you know what, maybe it's time to ramp up the offense again, or were you really just dead set on keeping that board spotless?
I think you really have to play it. Well, I think I really played it hand to hand. If I had a hand that was really good at going face and would threaten a pretty powerful on-hit trigger, it might have changed my strategy, but I didn't actually see my Oakenolds until close to the end of the first cycle was when I saw the first one with that Rainbow Oakenold turn. So I didn't really have a good opportunity to go face in the early and mid game. So I felt like I was kind of basically forced to clear out the auras the way I did, and it ended up going pretty well. So I'm not unhappy that that was how I drew.
It worked out definitely. I mean, you won the whole match, and it was a close game ultimately. And it being a close game, sometimes you can sort of allude to the fact that perhaps an error or a miscalculation or a missed tunic trigger, as it were, may be, one of the root causes of a win or loss. I got to ask you about this because this has been circulating amidst the social media spheres and whatnot. And I've always been a proponent of giving credit where credit is due. And you deserve a lot of credit, if not all of it, for winning that match. And this whole sort of wave of, missed tunic punting the match. I always think that you need to give the respect and the credit to the person who won the game because, in my opinion, having it's been a long day. I totally get it. You played 7 rounds in day 1. You played 5 plus the additional 3 games all day. You've played 15 rounds of Flesh and Blood over the course of 2 days. You're tired and whatnot. But to me, mental endurance and that kind of stamina is all part of the process. So the fact that you played relatively cleanly against somebody who may have missed the trigger or something like that, I want to know what your response is perhaps to the fact that people who might say, well, you didn't win, Pheno punted.
So first off, I don't know if anyone's saying I didn't win when they say Pheno punted, because those things can go, they're not mutually exclusive. So Pheno, he did make a pretty big mistake that ended up costing a lot. I don't know if it would have changed the outcome of the game. It's really hard to know because a lot of like decision cycles would have been different if he had that tunic counter. But I think it is okay for him to be publicly, like, he posted the first meme. He kind of started the I missed my tunic trigger, don't win the tournament, save Prism from Living Legend, stuff like that. And even before the finals started, he was kind of joking around about he could throw the game and Prism wouldn't be Living Legend or wouldn't have to worry about Prism Living Legend being. In the end, it doesn't. People are going to make mistakes in Flesh and Blood. It's a really hard game, and it's just part of the game is you're going to make mistakes. And I don't think acknowledging those mistakes that you made takes anything away from the people that won.
That's a very healthy approach to it. And just so we're all clear, there's no animosity between the two of you or anything, right?
Yeah, I believe we're on good terms.
Okay, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, listen, I'm not here to sort of fan the flames of anything like that. I just figured it was definitely worth addressing because I think a lot of the community is making a bigger deal out of this, and then frankly, I think it's worth. Ultimately, you won the tournament, and there was a mistake made in the game, and like you mentioned, was that mistake pivotal in terms of determining who wins or loses that game? I don't think so. I'm just very much somebody who likes to hammer down the fact that somebody won and that it wasn't that the win was due to an error or whatnot. Sometimes that is the case, but in this case, I don't think so because that tunic trigger didn't necessarily create the lethal that happened. But that last turn that you played, in my opinion, was so awesome, and it was very much a nice display of what a champion does in terms of how they play because you had essentially put your opponent in a position where I believe you had Starvo, you had the ability activated on that last turn, right? And it was all about methodically not making that additional mistake. It was just, all right, come in with the attack, draw out some resources, and then, some people would just snap drop the winner's bite and swing swing in with their hammer, but you know, just because that's just the muscle memory of those turns, preserve the arsenal, etc. And it's like, all right, well, if they do block it, I have a whole other turn to do some nonsense. But you're just like, okay, you took your time, and this is what I very much appreciated about it, was that you took your time to make sure that all your ducks were in a row, and that the first domino fell squarely into the second, into the third, into the win. And that was awesome to think. Now, can you just walk us through? You draw that last hand, and you kind of see that your line to victory here is almost guaranteed. Can you just walk us through that thought process?
I honestly don't remember exactly what the last turn of the game was. I remember after I had played the big attack, I had the winner's bite in my arsenal. I had one other card to swing the hammer, and I could have just swung the hammer, but if somehow his card in hand was a sink below, or somehow his card in arsenal was a soul shield, he would live one more turn. So I knew if I played the winner's bite, it would just get the last card out and clear the way.
Yeah, it worked out, and you had basically just a clear route to victory, and a defenseless hammer, or rather a hammer that had no defenses against it, just came through and cleaned it up, and you won again on Guardian. And I have to ask you, is Guardian? I mean, I get it; it's a class that you've won with, but is it truly your favorite class? Is this absolutely something that you can feel comfortable saying, no, I am the master of this class. I am the Guardian master.
It's kind of awkward because Guardian and Runeblade have been the best two classes for quite a while now, and Prism has a fair argument as well. But I really gravitate towards more controlling style decks, and Runeblades are not that at all. They're like very aggressive, very much want to play 5-card hands to attack, and that's not really the kind of game that I enjoy playing the most. So, because Guardians have felt like the tools they have are very powerful, and they feel like the best option outside of the Runeblades for both events that I've done well in, that I've just gravitated towards them. I think in the future, I'm definitely looking forward to trying out some of the other classes as they get more tools and more powerful equipment.
Are you just a control player at heart?
Yeah, I've always been a control player.
And it suits your style. Guardian does control very, very well. Do you think that you might actually just pivot to something a little bit more aggressive just for fun now that you've won 2 callings?
At like smaller and local events and for playtesting, definitely. But at big events, if I think a control deck's my best shot of winning, I'm definitely gonna play the control deck. And I think it suits my play style and how I enjoy playing the game.
One last question regarding your deck and some of the unique choices you made. I should have asked this earlier regarding some of the card choices that you did make, but there's some that you didn't make, and that would be the exclusion of Awakening. And I know you mentioned this and you talked about it a little bit after your win in the post-game interview, but are you able to just elaborate a bit about your thoughts of Awakening as a card and why you decided that it had no place in your deck?
Yeah, so now that I've had some time to rest, I can give a better answer about it. Awakening, if you're ahead or the game's even, it's a blue pitch that doesn't do anything. It doesn't block, which is a pretty big downside, and it doesn't turn on your Starvo ability. So if you're not casting it, the card's pretty bad, which isn't true about a lot of the blues that you can play in Starvo, but this one is very bad if you're not casting it. The second thing is, when it is good, you have to shuffle your deck after you resolve it. So you spend so long carefully setting your nice ice, earth, lightning cards together into your deck to set up your Starvo on the second cycle. And then you play Awakening, you pick up your deck, you pull out your big card, and then you shuffle it all and ruin all that pitch stacking. And that's really unsatisfying, and really, you do get a lot of advantage immediately when you play it, but you lose like the advantage that you would have set up from having good pitch stacking. So those are the two biggest reasons that I don't like the card.
So your future of Starvo now, and a lot of people are discussing potential bans and restrictions or changes, erratas, etc. Do you have any thoughts as to whether it will be changed or touched in any way? And if you do think so, what would you say could be some of those options or your predictions for how it will be, transformed or altered in a way?
I've heard a lot of different proposals for what could be done. Things like making the pulses only count as one element, early living legend, giving him an early living legend, banning cards, making Oakenhold a Oldheim specific card. I honestly do not know what they should do, and I'm really glad I do not have to be the one to make that decision.
Yes. Yeah, you're only tasked with playing the cards, right? I'm in the same boat as you. I get asked these types of questions all the time at different events and whatnot. They're like, so what do you think they should do? I'm like, dude, I don't get paid for this. Like, I am not here to come up with ideas. I've heard the same ones that you have. I think Oldheim specialization could be a nice way to sort of, throttle back on the disruptive elements of what Starvo can do. But yeah, man, I'm with you. I'm like, I am not paid to think about this stuff. So I'm cool with that if you're cool with that.
Yeah.
But if Starvo is nerfed, let's say Starvo just kind of loses a lot of its luster here, just loses a lot of its thrust. What do you feel is the next deck to watch leading up to Pro Tour?
I was really impressed by. Oh, I should have figured out should have found out his last name. Cody. I played him in the top 8. The
chain player. Yes, I believe it. Yes. I don't know if it's Cody Williams. I believe it might be Cody Williams. I apologize if that's not the last name, but yeah, Cody was exquisite on chain.
Yeah, he played extremely well, and his deck seemed really well put together. And that is I think chain might be the boogeyman if Starvo's gone, because that deck seemed really powerful.
This is one thing that we noticed, because I think I watched 2 games that you played against Cody on stream. If I'm not mistaken, you played him twice, and there was that initial realization of like, hold on a second, I think that I'm like, is Michael's going full fatigue here? And I have to ask you this. I know this isn't on this, the list of questions that I sent you or whatnot, but I did want to ask you, when you saw that banish at one point where he just flipped over 2 Artivores and they were gonzo, was that a nice little feeling of relief when you see 2 Artivores just bite it?
Yeah, they are extremely scary when they're played out. So it was very nice. I don't know.
Definitely. Well, you are the new number 1 player, and you do supplant Matt Rogers as the number 1 ranked classic constructed player. And Matt Rogers on the podcast a couple of weeks ago was very, very clear when he said that he does not believe that he is long for that number 1 spot. He knew that people were nipping at his heels because he agreed with me that the whole field in itself, the entire competitive landscape, has basically elevated the game. Everybody is catching up to that smaller group of elite players. That the entire field has, on average, improved their gameplay and their skill level. Now, yourself as number 1, first of all, being the world number 1, I don't want to say is there any motivation left? Obviously there's other things that you want to achieve. There's the Pro Tour, there's the Pro Tour, there's all kinds of other major events, but is there some sort of relief associated with being number 1 that you said, like, I got here, like I can kind of throttle back a bit?
Well, actually, I feel like there's almost more pressure on me now, because like this ELO rating, as soon as there's one more event, if I don't do great at that event, I'm falling under the next person who does well. And I think that Flesh and Blood is really hard, and I know I still make a lot of mistakes. I still feel like I have a lot of room to get better, and if I feel that way, then there's definitely a lot of room for people to get better than me. So I have to I want to keep putting in the effort and keep getting better and try to hold on to that spot as long as I can.
It's crazy because you're kind of like the dog with the bone, right? Like the rest of the pack are chasing you, and that's where you got to be. You got to be ahead of the game. And if you ever stop to sort of smell the roses, that's when you get lapped by the field. And for yourself as the new number 1 ranked player, what is your next step here? What's your next move in terms of your competitive career? Are you right back at it? Are you like taking a few days off and then you're right back to the drawing board preparing for Pro Tour? What's the game plan now?
Yeah, it's definitely preparing for New Jersey. I am planning on going a little bit lighter until the ban and restricted announcement. It doesn't make a lot of sense to work on a Starvo list when there is a high chance something's going to change, I feel like. So I'm going to rest a little bit, spend some time with my loved ones, and once we get that news on April 5th, I think I'll get right back to it.
That's good. That's good news. And again, my friend, I really do appreciate you being on the show, and you're a delight to talk to. And it's so awesome to watch your success because your play style, your deck choices, etc. They're very unique. They're very intelligent, and the way that you play is something that people should should watch and study and just keep in their mind in terms of how to keep poise, how to have a game plan, and how to execute it. So, Michael Hamilton, I do appreciate being on the show. Congratulations on winning the Calling in Indianapolis.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. All right, friends, thanks for listening. This has been In Response, produced by Instant Speed Podcast, 983 Media, the whole works. Don't forget, friends, you're not losing if you're learning. We'll catch you next time on Instant Speed.